I moved into what appeared to be a sea of light. It was as if every atom or molecule in this room had been electrified with love, with creative and very powerful love. We think of love as being something not powerful, but this love, I realized, was the greatest force of all things. And it was as if every atom were an individual and were singing and was welcoming me and was full of love. And yet I was more and more attracted to what I perceived to be the center of this sea of light. It was as if in the center of this sea there was a sun. And my heart was just irresistibly attracted to that. And again, in an instant, with a tremendous clash, not clash, but in a tremendous and magnificent instant, I entered this center of the sea of light, this sun in the sea, the light, the heart of the light. And it was as if I were devastated. It was as if I were, just spider silk in the solar wind. I was completely devastated by bliss and by rapture and by ecstasy. And yet I was not. I was simply in of, and because of that light, and yet I was, as an individual, destroyed. It was as if I were the quintessential phoenix. And it seemed that I was in that non-place, that place of non-being as an individual for forever. And then yet again, my consciousness at some point was gathered back together as an individual, like sands upon a shore, into an individual form. And I was accompanied now by a presence, as opposed to simply being devastated by this holy storm of light. And I was called to recount for the deeds of my life. And this recounting for the deeds of one's life is not like we would think at all in terms of this life. Because what was important were the choices that I made. And what was more important than just the choices that I made were my motivations and my intents and really the state of my heart in doing any single action. And I realized in this, because I experienced sort of in a holographic awareness that was rather instantaneous, how every action that one takes is like a stone cast in the water. And if it's loving, that stone is cast in the water, and the loving action goes out and touches the first person that it's intended for, and then it touches another person, and then it touches another person, because that person interacts with other people, and so on and so on. And every action has a reverberating effect upon every single one of us on the face of this planet. So if I had committed a loving action, it was like love upon light. A purely loving action was the most wonderful thing that I could ever have achieved in my life. This had more meaning than to have been a Rockefeller or President of the United States, or to have been, a great scientist and to have invented something just incredible. If I had committed a truly pure and loving action, it had reverberated throughout the stuff of every individual on that planet, and I felt that action reverberating through them and through myself. And I felt it in a way that is beyond what we can even feel ourselves on this plane of existence. So the significance of one's actions totally changed. What was not important was anything that I had, owned or known intellectual, there's a sense of intellectual pride, not that knowledge is bad, knowledge is good, but what was important was the purity and the motivation of every action. And I recall the most important of my actions is an instant I would never have recalled except for the near-death experience. And that's many years ago. I had worked every summer as a volunteer with retarded children. There was a day camp that went on, and I spent all summer going every day, 8 hours a day, to this day camp. And there was a child one time. It wasn't as if I were being rewarded for taking good actions, like writing down actions. Well, I have done this good and that good and that good. No, what was important was, again, the motivation and the purity and the sincerity of my acts. And I had taken a child aside on a very hot day, and this was not a charming or a particularly lovable child. But I wanted this child to feel loved. I wanted this child to feel really the love of God that brought him into existence and that brought us all into existence. And I took him aside, although I wasn't religiously motivated, formally. I just wanted him to feel love. I took him aside and sang to him and gave him something to drink and just spend some time with him. And he was very agitated, but I just wanted him to feel that love. And that was the greatest of all actions. And that filled me with just unspeakable and incomprehensible joy. And it was not an action that anyone noticed. And it was not an action that I even recalled. And it was not an action that I had done with any thought of reward. It was simply an action motivated by love, by selfless love. And this had great meaning. In this context, one becomes aware that, judgment is not necessarily imposed from the outside, but there was a judgment that was born of the sense of mine own knowledge. Suddenly I had a point of reference. Suddenly I realized that it was love that had brought me into existence on this plane of existence. It was love that had guided me through every instant of my life. It was really a love that had accompanied me throughout my whole life and accompanied every individual throughout my whole life. And really there was nothing that I could have done to have been worthy of that love, that unspeakable, incomprehensible, immeasurable love that I realized that I was receiving and that all individuals were receiving. So to have committed any act of love was the greatest joy and the greatest wonder and the greatest achievement. And to have committed any act that was selfish and that was in any way cruel, you can imagine the impact of that act reverberating throughout the stuff of all existence and all individuals. This would be the sense of great turmoil and pain, and one would rather die than to have committed such an act.
And she said, energy isn't created or destroyed, it just changes form. That's God's rule borrowed by man. The energy of who you are can't die, it just has to change forms because you can't stop energy. I was like, that is the best explanation I've actually ever heard. Everything else sounds good, but it didn't make sense scientifically. And so I was real happy to hear that. And I thought, boy, she's smart, So we were just kind of glad to be there and be in her arms. I can't even remember all the things that we went over. And I remember asking her if I was dead. And she said, oh, no, you're not dead. She said, you're kind of in between. You've got the you that's, sick in the hospital, and then the spirit side of you that's here, and there's a cord that's attaching you to your body. But if you decide to stay, the cord will be broken and you'll stay. And if you decide to go back, the cord will pull you back. And I thought, okay, well, that's good. So I know how that works now. And I just was kind of in her arms and I started crying again. And she did the, calm yourself, dear one. And I almost fell asleep. I was in this really super relaxed state, but aware. But I looked around after a while and I realized she was gone. And I'm like, okay, where did, she's gone. But I was still in the light, so I was okay. And I started hearing this rumbling. Like if you've ever gone and seen those air shows where like the Blue Angels go, or I went to one when I was pregnant with my daughter. It was so intense that it threw me into labor. And that's what it was like. It was just like this rumbling that went all the way to your bones, almost ached. I could see the effect of whatever that was, and it was shaking everything that had ever existed. But it was doing it in a way that you wouldn't be able to see it on this side, but I could see it. So everything that had ever existed, everything that existed, everything that would ever exist, existed, and it was all shaking. And I was like, oh no, it's God. And I think most people are like, yay, I get to see God. And immediately I was like, oh shoot, if she could read your mind, he probably can too. You need to think of something good you've done. And nothing came to mind. And I'm not like a serial killer. I should be able to think of one thing. And I couldn't think of anything. And I'm like, oh no, what? There's got to be something. And I could feel this shaking getting closer. And finally he's there and it's this light. And I say he, but I didn't see a person. But the whole interaction to me seemed like a masculine figure. And he got there, then my brain was just quiet. And I don't think I've ever had that, where there's not any thought going through. Your mind is just open and you're experiencing everything around you, but you're not thinking about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, God is here. He's going to like go through my life and stuff. This is going to be really bad. And so immediately he's like, calm yourself. And I calmed down, and it almost felt like we materialized in this scene in my life. And so the first thing he showed me was good, and he showed me myself in this grocery store, this little grocery store in this town we used to live in. And there was a lady ahead of me in line, and she didn't have enough money to pay. She was trying to figure out what to put back. And I was a single mom, and 3 kids, and I'd been there, and she was so embarrassed. She's apologizing to the people in line, and I stood close to her, and I said, hey, here. And I took the money out of my purse, and I gave it to her, and she's like, no, that's okay. You don't have to do that. I'll just put this back. And she was going to put back the things that were for her. None of the things that I could see were for her family. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I know I've been in that spot. And I said, it's okay, take it, take the money. It's like change, So she took it, and I'm like, wow, of all the good things I've done, that's it, that's the one, it seems so minor. And then the scene expands, and it's years down the road, and I can see her in this, like a food closet, food pantry sort of thing for people who don't have enough food. And this lady comes in, and the lady that I had helped in the grocery store is working behind the counter. And a woman comes in, and she's like, I'm just so embarrassed. We just don't have enough food. And the lady's like, it's okay. Gets me every time. It's okay, I've been there myself. Let me help you. Don't feel bad. And I was amazed at the ripple effect. I thought, I handed 70-some cents to a woman, and it's still changing the world this many years later. Maybe not in a huge way, but a lot of little changes add up. I was just amazed that some little kindness that I had forgotten registered that high. And so I'm like, okay, what's the bad thing? And I'm thinking of all the things that I don't want to watch myself relive with God standing next to me. And he pulls up this scene, and it's this, I worked with this nurse, and she was very hard to work with. She had a very difficult personality. I found myself like picking up a lot of the slack and kind of resenting her for that. And I never said anything negative to her, but I thought a whole lot of negative things. And I was thinking very judgy thoughts about her, and God showed me her life. And I was just blown away. And he showed me all the things that her dad had done to her, and all the abuse that she'd endured, and still she decides to go into a helping profession. So while she was not what I would consider an ideal nurse, she had so overcome her past. And despite all of the horrible things she'd been subjected to, she chose to go into a profession where she could help people. And God told me, he said, you have to be careful. Thoughts have energy, and words have more energy, and actions have more energy. And words and actions come from thoughts, and you have to learn to control your thoughts, because all those negative things that you think about her It doesn't matter if you spoke them or not. That energy travels and it gets on her and it makes her more that way. And you make it harder for her to break out of that mold. That's why, you're supposed to pray for people who hurt you. Because by hating them quietly or by despising them quietly, you're hindering their being able to move on and be a better person. And it just blew my mind because I was always that person who hated people who gossiped. Women would be standing around, and it's just so common in the nursing profession, and they'd all be standing there and they'd start talking trash about a fellow coworker, and I would just turn around and walk away. So they always thought I was weird because I would just walk away in the middle of conversations. And I just thought, you're talking about her that way. I'm sure when I'm not here, you're talking about me that way, and I don't trust you for that. And I thought that I was better because I didn't say the things out loud. And so it really was an interesting perspective on something that I hadn't considered anything I needed to work on.
Well, I want to, and that's a good point, John. And I want to just point out here, and we have this notion, and we've all done tough stuff, Don't be afraid. It is the most wonderful experience, and I want to explain this to you as well, all right? The other incident that I'm going to tell you about in this life review of mine was so innocuous, I had forgotten all about it. We had this guy in our community, and it's not his real name, we'll call him Mr. Dirksen, right? Who was rumored to be, he's an alcoholic, and rumored to be a wife abuser, and he beat his wife up lots, and people would see her with, wearing sunglasses with shiners and stuff. And just a nasty kind of guy. And one morning, I come out of City Hall and ran right into him, so I just chatted him up. I did not remember this, but I was experiencing it in this life review. It was so innocuous to me. It was just sort of like, and I sort of, oh, yeah, I guess I remember that kind of. And I chatted him up. I was like, Mr. Dirksen, how are you doing? How's the wife? How are the kids? And we chatted for like a minute or two, and I had no idea of the effect that had. And it was kind of like this. So maybe on this day, Mr. Dirksen felt better about himself. So when he went home, he didn't beat up his wife. And maybe on this day, Mrs. Dirksen felt better about herself, so she didn't take it out on the kids. And the kids didn't take it out on their playmates in the playground. And I got to see how one simple, innocuous, forgettable act of kindness affected so many people. It was so remarkable. That is good for the soul to know. So that's the kind of thing you will experience as well.
I then started going through what you hear of the tunnel experience. And I saw and heard noises around me of people talking that it sounded familiar. But I couldn't see them. Those were my guides. I then knew I was badly burned. And then suddenly I saw my life review in circumference around me. And then I saw all of my life. And when you see your life, you look for the worst things you've ever done in your life. The bad things. So I looked for them, and guess what? They were gone. And why were they gone? Because I had asked for forgiveness. So they were gone. But I was a good person, too. I saw all the bad things I'd done, yelling and screaming at the kids and all of that. And I realized that their poor little hearts were more devastated, and I got to feel their pain intensely, 1,000-fold, and I just couldn't take it. But I'm a good person. I did this and this and this. And guess what? They weren't there. You know why? Because I was doing them for me. But what was there was a girl that I had seen on a rainy day that I had forgotten about. And I couldn't tell whether she was crying or it was the rain. And I just said hi to her and smiled. That's all. Hi. Have a great day. And what I found out was she was going to go commit suicide. She had given up any hope on humanity. And one simple smile changed the destiny of her life. Your simple smile can change the destiny of someone's life.
place that I was in had no ceiling. It was just blue sky up above. There were about 150 to 200 people there, and they were beautiful. They were so thrilled to see me. Nobody has ever been that thrilled to see me. They were all applauding. Many of them were crying. Every one of them had to hug me. Some 2 or 3 times had to hug me. I hugged every one of them. They were communicating an affection, a level of affection that is, I've never had that before, ever. Way back in the distance, way up behind me, on the top of a mountain, so big that it had this winding road all the way up it, and there were so many people on that road going up and coming down that the hill looked like it was alive, like it was like a beehive, you know, just constantly moving. And the top of the hill, very clearly delineated, was a Syrian mountain man. And he looked an awful lot like Jesus. He looked to be about 15 feet tall, long hair, beard, mustache, and just the most piercing and kind eyes. He asks you a question. What did you do for your fellow man? It's a life review. You're going year by year through your whole life. Anytime you're stuck and you don't recall, one of the walls comes alive as the movie of your life, and it shows you doing something for your fellow man. For me, that was when I was 10, 11 years old. I didn't know if I did anything for somebody then. And the wall came alive, and there I was as a crossing guard at my grammar school. And I just took that responsibility so seriously, especially with the little kids, the kindergartners and the first graders and so on. And according to wherever I was, I call it paradise, but that was what I did for my fellow man when I was 10.
I was always real fortunate. I came from a wonderful home, had a wonderful childhood. My parents loved me desperately. And their love, you just, compared to this woman, you can't even compare it. When she came, she stood next to me, and she extended her hand outward, and she said, "Look there." And when I turned my head, I saw from the moment I was born, and I watched every second of my life from the moment I was born until I died. And it wasn't just seeing it, I lived it again, exactly the way I felt it the first time, but with a new sense of kind of intellectual understanding about how I could have done it different, what might have been better, and other things that I cared little about, that I didn't think made an impression on anybody's life at all, were very significant. And probably the most important was when I worked at a convalescent hospital in high school after school. And I used to give a lady graham crackers and milk before I'd leave the shift. And I had no idea how much I had changed her life, how grateful, how appreciative she was. And I thought it was so insignificant back at that time in the 11th grade, but it wasn't. It was like every spirit looking down and saying, "Thank you for doing this. This woman had nobody. No one loved her."
And everything that I saw in this life review, starting with the day that I was born until that day that I had died, was not at all what I had seen before. This time, these were things that were important to God, not important to man. And they were not at all those accomplishments that I talked about before. These were things like love and acts of kindness, things I couldn't even remember that I had done. Befriending someone that everybody was mean to, or, you know, a neglected an animal, and I helped an animal, or giving money to a homeless person when I didn't really have money to give. Helping someone, you know, across the street, an elderly person. Every single action, word, thought, feeling was all about love. And we lived all of those series of events just like the first time, like it was happening for that very first time. I lived it again, and I felt so much unconditional love from God as we're reliving this series of events together.
With the light, there is this panoramic view of my life. It starts with birth. It continues right on to where we are at this point. All at the same time, I am part of the view as well as watching it. I am actually doing these things. I guess it's a speeded up version of a camera that just runs double time or something. But I actually had the feelings of what was going on as I saw it, and also standing off to the side and being able to look around and look at the different things that went on at different times in my life. And what I had always thought was important and nice things I had done, they didn't even count for anything. It's the little unknown things that you do for one another. And love there is always helping to give others a love and helping hand along the way, and at the same time you're benefiting because you're receiving also.
You know, it's really not that complicated. It's like God took this with this, put it together, and there you have it. It's the little things that you do. It's the little things, the loving things, or the not so loving things. It's not these grand, great, big, humongous things that people think they have to do in order to earn your way into heaven, because you can't earn your way into heaven no matter what you do, for one. And for two, it's the little things. It's the smile you gave to someone whose life was really a mess, the hand on the shoulder. It's the sharing your toys when you were little. It's the, here, you lost your sweater and you're cold, here's my sweater. You know, little things you don't think would matter at all. That's the stuff that matters.
I feel like there's such a spiritual void in the world, but I don't think God's design is for ultimate destruction and calamity. I don't. Now, do I think that people with power can push it to that? Absolutely. And ultimately you're going to be okay. So, you know, don't let that cause you to lose a lot of sleep and live your life in anxiety. I find everything that's going on incredibly fascinating. It's like the most interesting novel I've ever read. But don't fall into it. We have to kind of separate ourselves from all of that chatter that's going on. Turn off your TV. Believe me, if something bad enough happens that you need to react to, someone's going to tell you. And you've got to pull yourself out of that experiment that's going on where they're just trying to have us at each other's throats. It's interesting because you can destroy an entire people without ever firing a shot. You can just turn them against each other. But there's nothing in me that wants bad for you or bad for anybody else, and I will help you, and I will do it out of a pure heart, not because I just don't want you to think I'm a bad person, and most people are that way. And I think we have to start realizing that we're not here by accident. I know this all seems chaotic and super scary, and like it's just all going to crash and burn, but we're here right now. The timing of your being here right now is not an accident. God thought you up in his head for a while. He could have put you in any time frame, but he put you in this one. You're here for a reason, and you need to figure out what that reason is. And part of figuring that out is engaging with people and having community and knowing who your neighbors are and knowing what's going on around you and engaging in a kind and productive way in that. You know, don't be a force for destruction. We keep looking outside of ourselves for answers, and that is the problem. If you want something done in your house and you want it done right, you don't send your 9-year-old boy to do it, generally, right? You do it yourself because it's an important task and it needs to be done properly. And so I feel like we have to get back to that. We have to get back to being involved in our community, being involved in our local area, the decisions that are being made, knowing our neighbors, knowing what the needs are in your community. I mean, you've got people living in communities and they have no idea how prolific their homeless population is, or their population of people who are addicted to drugs, or your number of elderly shut-ins. Nobody knows. These people just go invisible. Pretty soon you start losing hope. And we've all walked through like this, and now it's a hot mess. And the answer to that is re-engaging and believing that you are the light of the world. God is in you, and people are looking for that. And, you know, just showing people love every day is plenty. It's plenty. It's way more than a lot of people are doing. God noticed the change I gave a woman in a grocery store and thought it was impactful enough to show that as the only good thing I'd done in my life. He knew there were others, but that was, to him, that was the most important thing, just this spontaneous act of kindness. And so this was the message that God had given me, and I know I'm kind of like reading off my computer now, but I have to be able to see it. So he said, "Such folly to think that anything escapes my knowing, as when you were with me. All at once, all that I allowed you to know, you knew. No words were spoken, nor were they shouted. I whispered them into your spirit. I discreetly filled you with knowing. Knowing flowed into you as effortlessly as taking a breath. Is it not so? No truer words have ever been spoken or written. The great I am is in your core. The great I am is the light. Even when I am hidden, still I am. Is my energy charged, sending me over each synapse in your brain? Even those small fibers knew that I am. They rose and they fell to the rhythm I created, to the symphony I conducted, I composed. I consider it a tragic comedy of arrogance when man denies what the smallest innervation knows. Man thinks he acts and moves outside my knowledge. How could it be so? I say, I proclaim, he does not. His own fibers clutch themselves, laughing at the idea. I am the flower, the wind, the rain, the sinew, the marrow, the rock, the author, the maker, the touch that set in motion all that you see, all that you know, and all that you do not see or know. I knit you. I put breath in you. I'm coded in every cell. Every nanosecond of time falls in step as I will it so. I am in you. I am all. Even when you perceive nothing, still I am there. As I tell you this here and now, pressing my truth into your breast, your very heart presses it further in.